So, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome from Mumbai. And my colleague and co-founder Indrajit Gupta is with me as well. IG, as we all know him, and we're all as excited to host a five-time world chess champion, Viswanathan Anandan, or Vishy Anand, as all of us know him. So, Vishy, would you want to say hello to everyone in the room out here?
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
So,
Joining you from Dubai.
yeah, so Vishy, like I said, he's just joining us from Dubai, where he was doing commentary duty at the recently concluded World Chess Championship between Magnus Carlsen and Ian Nepomniachtchi. Vishy, did I pronounce that right? Nepomniachtchi? Uh,
Okay, so I think in the transliteration to English,
okay,
they put in the CTH or CHT, whatever. They put that too often and it confuses people.
okay,
I got it from Jan himself.
okay.
The simplest is Nepomniachtchi,
Okay, okay, okay.
but very precise would be Nepomniachtchi. But
Nepomniachtchi.
Nepomniachtchi is fine.
Okay,
So
okay, okay, okay. All right. So anyway, so just to get back, so much like how Vishy raised the bar on chess, he showed the world the bar can be raised on commentary too, and he earned kudos for his analysis of each game, and we're hoping to hear him speak about just how he did that. But before we get there, I must welcome R Sukumar, who's editor in chief at Hindustan Times. And Suku, hi. You want to say hello to everybody out there?
Hello, everyone, and absolute pleasure to be here and absolute honor to be chatting with Vishy.
So, Sukumar, like most of you may know, is based out of Delhi, and he's a big Vishy fan as well. And he follows the game very closely, and is a distinguished alumnus of BITS Pilani, and that's a very useful connection and a segue for me to keep in mind as well to introduce our other guest this evening, Dr. Ranjan Banerjee. Ranjan is the founding dean at the BIT School of Management, or BITSOM, which is a global business school based in Mumbai. Ranjan, a very warm welcome. Good evening. Ranjan.
Hi, Charles. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. And this is one of those rare occasions in life where I'm doing something which is respected by my parents' generation, my generation, and my kids' generation. So when I get to talk to Viswanathan Anand, there are three generations which look at me and say, wow, that is something worthwhile.
And I've got two other chess fanatics on stage with me as well. My colleagues NS Ramnath and Anmol Srivastava. They've been tracking the World Championships very closely, and they've played a big role in curating this chat. Ram, Anmol, you guys want to say hi very quickly?
Hello,
Uh,
hello, and I think my children, when I have them, will also appreciate, much like Professor Ranjan, that I was on this panel with Vishy.
Yeah, super excited to be here.
Yeah. So before we move on, and while we are hosting this conversation, IG, would you like to provide a quick perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. This Twitter Space live chat with Vishy this evening is actually a build-up to a more in-depth conversation that I think our favorite world champion will engage in with Dean Ranjan Banerjee on January 15th. That conversation in Jan is actually part of a very distinctive month-long ideas festival. It's called Beacon 2022 that BITSOM, that Charles spoke about, is hosting. The announcement about the Ideas Festival went out here on Twitter and on other platforms yesterday, and we're at Founding Fuel curating that festival, so you might want to just look it up because a very a range of fine minds from around the world will be part of those conversations, and we're going to explore transformational ideas that can help us reimagine the future, especially in the wake of the pandemic. Towards the end of this Twitter Spaces chat, we're going to request Dean Ranjan Banerjee to give us a sneak peek into the theme of his upcoming chat with Vishy at the festival and how it fits into the larger charter of the festival as well. But today, I wanted to just mention that we're tuning into Vishy's unique perspective of what makes world champions tick. He's, of course, observed many champions over the years and been one himself. But what did he learn this time in Dubai during his stint in the commentary box? I'm sure that may have given him another unique lens to observe and better understand the DNA of a champion. So we'll explore that in his chat with Suku and some of the folks on the stage, Ranjan and others. We're, of course, delighted to have you, Vishy, and glad
Pleasure
that
to be
you've been
here.
able to take time to do this. So, Charles, back to you. Charles, are you there?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I'm on mute. So thanks, IG. We'll keep this session as interactive as possible. And I know that there will be many questions on your mind. So to save time, may I request you to just DM your questions on the Founding Fuel handle. And my colleague Ram is monitoring them, and we'll pick a few questions to ask Vishy in the time we have with him. And I'll pass the baton on to Suku, who'll take the conversation over from here. Over to you, Suku.
Thanks, Charles. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I can hear you, Vishy, and that's about it. I didn't hear anything that IG said. And I couldn't hear the Dean also. So I don't know whether some setting is wrong in my machine or what it is. But so if I act weird in the course of this session, it's because I can't hear anyone other than Charles and Vishy, which is
Okay.
actually a good place to be in, I would say.
So that
Right?
means you're in the zone now.
Yeah. And Vishy, I'm going to start off with a very obvious question. How easy is it to make the transition from being a champion chess player to uh, being a good chess commentator? And obviously, you know, the emphasis is on the word champion and good, because in cricket, you have a lot of average cricketers who then go on to become less than average commentators. But your commentary was excellent. I mean, it was as good as your playing was at its peak. And so I want to know how easy it is
I
to make
hope
that
not.
transition.
I hope not. But I basically try to adopt a kind of persona, and I also worked hard not to try to sound like someone I'm not. So my persona was, I'm going to be Viswanathan Anand. I'm going to talk about the game as I would talk about the game if I wasn't doing commentary, and I will not use the engine, so that it's the easiest possible way to transport myself into the player's shoes, and then bring in my perspective as well. I felt for the first time at a world championship, I realized what a world championship match looks like when you don't have any tension. See, when you play, every morning you wake up and you think of all the things that can go wrong. Somehow the tension never leaves you till the end. But here I experienced it from a different perspective. And also, as a commentator, I felt no pressure whatsoever. I felt that if people like it, it's good. Obviously, maybe the next time I'm a commentator, I'll feel more pressure. But I felt if people like it, it's good. I'll just try to be myself and leave it at that. And important was I wanted to not use computers at all. And if I make a mistake, I wanted the audience to see that, that's what it's like for the players. That without because in chess, it's almost soul crushing if you have the engine's verdict all the time. You don't experience anything. You experience a bunch of moves and nothing more. So I tried to, but once I adopted that character and I never checked with the engine, then it became easy. I felt free to say whatever I wanted to say. I did not care if I was making a mistake or was inaccurate about something. I would maybe think a little bit harder, but before saying it, but nothing more than that. and I enjoyed it a lot. It was nice to be in a situation where suddenly you're thinking, this is what chess looks like to someone else, and this is what chess looks like to someone else who is very, very casual. And I tried to get into the mind of such a person, but it's not easy because I can lower my level a lot and still miss a lot of people by a mile, and that's one problem. Like
Yeah.
you know, I'll try to give some basic variation, and I realize that people for whom even that is too much. But you know, I watch commentary on other subjects, and so I understand the reverse very easily. I understand that even if they're explaining something at a very basic level, it goes beyond your head. So.
Do you think that the dependence on the engine has sort of taken the charm out of commentary?
Um, I wanted to avoid it because I feel that if you have the engines, see the drama in chess is literally not knowing what comes next and sitting there and trying to figure out what is he thinking about. I don't see it. Why is he hesitating? You know, it's obvious to me that this is good or this is bad. What is it he sees that I don't see? I think that conveys the drama very well. The engine says white is winning if he makes this move, and after that you've killed everything. If the player who's sitting at the board thinks for 10 minutes, you've lost him for the remaining 9 minutes and 57 seconds. Modern engines are so powerful; they in 1 second they see what a player might not see during the entire game, and it's it's impossible to do in my opinion. I think the commentators should not use engines. Once in a while, you can, and I did do this myself, which is once I gave my verdict and I said, this is what I'm seeing. I just don't see what the players have missed or something like that. And then later on, at the end of that thing, when that variation was already 3 or 4 moves in the past, I would say, okay, let's switch on the engine and just see what is the verdict and what we said. I think that is nice. But using an engine, you might as well just get an AI to do the talking as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's exactly what I was asking, right? Because the charm is, like you said, um, trying to figure out for yourself what comes next, and trying to understand what the player is thinking, instead of having the answer handed over to you immediately. Um, I'm sure there are many listeners here who followed the championship only vaguely or through very, very macro reports. So can you just tell us how the match panned out? What were the key moments? And of course, six, right? I mean, game six, which really seemed to change the tide. And 6 and 7, there was very little gap, right? Or was it? Yeah, it was 6 and 7, right? The two games, there was really very little time between the two. So can you just take us through this whole thing?
Okay, so this match was between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Magnus Carlsen is the highest rated player in history. He broke that record, ironically, 9 years back. And he himself has not reached those heights again, though um, every single year, his rating would be the highest rated in history as well for the last 8 or 9 years, with some minor exceptions, brief periods where he dropped under the old record. But essentially, that shows the level of his dominance. To give you an idea, when he plays a game with the second highest rated player in the world, he is losing 1 point if he makes a draw. And that kind of gives you a sense of the gap that he faces in keeping his rating up there. His dominance in almost all formats, in all events, is huge. So, big favorite. But in a match, and this is one of the reasons Carlsen doesn't like matches, in matches, it's possible for an opponent to optimize himself to play Magnus Carlsen. Essentially, what that happens is someone like Karyakin or Caruana or myself, we sit, we focus on that one opponent, and we figure out how do we, we try to break that person down. How do we do this? Um, Nepomniachtchi is a very talented player, someone whose talent was noticed 10, 12 years back, but he only broke into the top 10 like a year or two ago. He's a very late bloomer because he's in fact Carlsen's generation. They played in the World Under 12 Championships together and all that. He's a late bloomer, finally made his breakthrough. Happens in some cases, and so people were curious uh, whether he could face up. Like all opponents who are underrated, what you don't want to happen in a match is that you fall behind quickly at the beginning and then the whole match is suffering. So he neutralized Carlsen's preparation, but I felt he neutralized it in a way that was without showing too much respect. That when Magnus bluffs, you have to call his bluff. You can't give him the benefit of the doubt. You have to have this attitude of the board that I don't believe you. I think I'm just as good as you are. I don't believe your moves. Every single move I'm going to be skeptical about, I'm going to question. That sort of attitude. He did this well in game 2, in game 6 even. He did a fantastic job of matching Carlsen, mistake for mistake, but also good move for good move. And they kept pace for a very long time. But Jan has one big problem in his career, which is that he's got this impulsiveness, impetuousness. I mean, borderline indiscipline, I would say, because there are moments when he just mentally loses it. And then it takes him many moves, if not a whole game, to compose himself. The reason I've done the build-up rather than the match itself is that the match is just 6 games long.
Yeah.
First 5 games, Nepomniachtchi did a great job of showing that he could take the match to the wire. Even if he is not threatening Magnus in every game, the very fact that the score is equal is putting pressure on what is, after all, a much higher rated player. Game 6 was a titanic struggle. It could have gone either way on a couple of occasions. In fact, Magnus's wins were much harder to find. Magnus's wins were computer wins. And if you had just been watching the computer, you would have gotten a false picture. As a human being, I felt the moves which are given Nepo a big advantage were much easier for a human to find, and therefore I think he was the real victim of the to and fro in the 6th game. And this game broke all records, 136 moves, all that. But in the end, I would still say what separated them was a bit of mental strength. Nepomniachtchi would come time and again, make bold, decisive moves, and then just make one impulsive move, play it very fast, and I mean, there were echoes of me. I had a period in my youth when I just played the first move that came to my head and then realized I made a blunder. But anyway, and he then, several times in the game, having saved the game, he didn't have the sense to just stop and say, okay, now it's time for me to make a draw. I'll do this and I'll go. Or to be able to, he always had more time than Magnus in the critical phases and he still blew it. And at the end, Magnus took a game he had no right to win, and he won it, I would say, almost sheer willpower. And then the match just shuddered to a halt. It's a 1-point deficit. Nobody envies someone who has to beat Magnus Carlsen on demand, but you can still take the match to the wire. You can still force Magnus to come and work. But Jan just collapsed. He made one ridiculous decision after another, and I mean, he has his excuses. He said, I missed this, I missed that, but that's all a bit disingenuous. I think he essentially did not have the strength to continue. He didn't have the self-belief to continue. I mean, you behave like this, you don't believe that you're going to be able to do it. Then you can't convince yourself that you can do it. And he fell to pieces. And the games got more and more embarrassing. Game 8 was embarrassing to watch. Game 9 was just a blunder, but you understood that this is a man who's no longer in control of himself. And game 10 was pathetic. So that was it, actually. I mean, I would be able to go on much longer, but the match just ended very quickly. In one thing, I would say Magnus had mental strength and a little bit of luck, because with the same mental strength, he could have lost that 6th game, and then the opposite would have happened. But then Magnus would have fought like a lion. He would not have let go. The way it went, and his opponent just crumbled, and that was the end of the match.
You spoke about belief. And mental strength. By mental strength, do you also mean stamina? Because clearly, to keep going at that level for so long. And does that mean that Nepo, at least for this, was not prepared in terms of stamina? And if that's the case, how do you actually build that stamina?
Well, physical fitness is a very important component, but it's only one component in everything. Sometimes self belief also can be, you can get it from work. And much more so today than ever before, because imagine that you have deficiencies in your understanding of chess. You can, once upon a time, they would say, well, this will haunt you all your life because you'll never catch up. And it was true maybe 30 years ago, that you had to work within those things. But now you're able to, you have an engine running on your computer. Every idea you want to test, you just keep on testing it against that thing. And if it keeps punishing you, then you realize, wait, something in my understanding of this position is wrong. I need to figure this out. You do that, you get better at the thing. If you get better at something, you make better decisions. If you make better decisions, eventually you start believing in yourself. You go to the board and you sit there and think, this looks familiar, I've done this before, I can do it. It's, I mean, without mythologizing it, self belief just boils down to that. You sit there, you feel confident, you can deal with the problems, um, and it's based on something real. It's based on real physical training, which, and then you know that you have really stamina that you can believe in, and mental training, and you can really believe in that. Yeah, and what was puzzling was that Jan seemed to have it at the beginning, and then it turned out that all it took was one setback, and it no longer existed.
So, what does that mean, right? I mean, the obvious question everyone had after watching uh, the last few games, and your summation of it was apt, right? I mean, uh, because like you, to use your word, it was pathetic at the end, and
Mm.
in some ways, it one also felt sorry for Nepo,
Yes.
and but. And I know this is going to ask you to theorize a bit, but that's what commentators are supposed to do. Does this mean that there is a certain flaw, that there is a certain weakness that he has, uh, which is probably, again, going to uh, disadvantage him through his career? Or do you think this was just first big match, really, and things didn't go his way and he collapsed, and that he'll be able to bounce back? What do you think?
Okay. First of all, this is in the DNA of every single chess player. By definition, you're good at something, you're bad at something. You're, and it's reinforcing. If what you're good at, you believe that you're good at, and therefore you play it better and better, more and more confidently, more and more effortlessly, and the other way around. And every player, when faced with the positions that he dislikes playing, his level immediately drops. It's in every match, when you take someone, you drag them into terrain they don't want to be, the problems arise. Even, let's say, when I beat Kramnik in Bonn 2008, I simply managed to get him into a match that he didn't want to play. He had prepared mentally for another match, and here he felt that he had to react last minute. Same thing he had done to Kasparov 8 years before. He had done it beautifully. Kasparov outranked him by 90 points at that stage, but Kramnik made Kasparov feel helpless just by giving him positions he hated playing. So, with Nepo, I think the fact that he let it run is a bad mistake. He should have at least tried to pull himself together, make 3 or 4 draws at the end. See, you can change your goals and say, I'm no longer going to win this title, but I'm at least going to play a decent game and get back some confidence. It went runaway. He lost 2 more games in the last 2 things without needing to, and that will hurt him, because one day in 5 months he will wake up, he'll remember this match, and a shiver will go down his body, and it's worse because of the lack of resistance. Whereas if you at least put up a bit of fight in the end. You get back some of your belief in yourself, and you think then, okay, then you think it was a bad phase, but at least I could prove it like this. You make it easier for yourself to recover. And I think that's the problem for Jan. Nonetheless, it can happen. After my worst match, I immediately, which was in Chennai in 13, against the same Carlsen, by the way. And then I managed to, um, I basically was so disgusted with myself, I left chess, mentally speaking, for a couple of months. I did not look at any chess for almost 3 months. And then, little bit before the candidates, I decided I had to prepare a bit again, and I started to warm up a little bit. But I went there very pessimistically, and I even won the tournament, and things rebounded. It's possible to come back. I I I doubt that Jan will do it, because this must have knocked the stuffing out of him. But I don't feel that I think he'll still be a top player for a while. That strength isn't going to disappear, but
Uh,
he'll continue to have problems with Magnus. Having said that, most people wrote me off as well before the candidates, so keep that in mind with my predictions. So,
yes. No, but the reason I also asked this was because it was almost like you were watching two Nepos, right? I mean, between the first match and the last, it was almost as if we were a completely different player.
yes, very much. He made the kind of blunders he made in game 9, for instance, game 11, and all, were just. Um, People just thought, but even a grandmaster should be able to avoid this. You don't need to be Nepomniachtchi to avoid this. You can just think a little bit, and it's obvious. And the irony is, the tension was peaking in the games, because his team had prepared him well. He had gone there. He had executed the plan well. He had his chances, and he let it fall apart in one or two moves.
Hello.
Yeah. So he just lost. He lost in one or two moves at the time that the tension was peaking, and then you felt he had chances to come back, and he collapsed completely.
Yes, yes,
Hello?
yes. Sorry.
Okay.
My phone was just giving me trouble. This
All right.
is normally the time when I get plagued by lots of calls. So sorry about that. And I thought I'd switched it off, but clearly I hadn't. Um, you already answered the question I was going to ask next, which is really how tough it is to bounce back after a setback like this. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what I got was very difficult, uh, will take time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
some bounce back, some don't. But if you were to give Nepo advice on how to bounce back, what should he do?
In his case, the experience was so bad that I think it's worth remembering. I mean, all of us have things where we are scared will happen to us. Um, and those are the things we fear the most. Quite often, my advice to people is based on personal experience. Most of the time, your worst fears don't pan out. But in this particular case, I think it's fair to say that for Nepomniachtchi, that his worst fears did pan out. Having said that, there's some useful learning there. I could just think, I've been through this. Nothing happened. I still am going to play the candidates. You have to find a fresh attitude uh, to continue. What is it you're looking for in chess? You change your relationship a little bit. I think so far it's just gone. And see, when you're young, you don't need to do all these things to yourself. It's pretty obvious to why you're playing. It's pretty obvious. But later on, you'll go through stages in your life where um, you'll have to think. What is it that I keep coming back for? And and quite often it means new things. You either set new goals, or you want to learn something new, or you want to rediscover the old joy of playing without worrying about results. It can be many things, but he'll have to find a way to do that. And literally, he'll need a very good result to wipe out this memory. But I don't see that it's impossible for him. The main thing is to understand that it happened to him, and it was not an accident, and he has to learn something from it.
And real life chess is not Queen's Gambit, right?
No.
Because I'm sure you watched the show. And what were your thoughts on that? Hello?
Vishy, are you there?
I
Some
can't.
perspective, some philosophy, and you should be able to come back. I think as long as you love what you're doing and you go back to it, you should be okay.
All right. IG and Charles, do we have any questions? We're now around 15, 20 minutes into the session. If you have any questions.
Yes. Yes. So there are quite a few questions that have come in. A lot of them are obviously very squarely focused on pure chess. So we won't go there, but take some of the slightly more broader ones so that people can relate to it. There were some questions that focused on endurance and all of that. So I think I think Avinash Das had some questions around building endurance and preparing for the game at the highest level. And Vishy, so the question is really, I mean, I heard you talk about mental strength and building mental strength and removing the bad memories. Does a sports psychologist really have a role to play, and how critical is that in a chess context?
That's a very interesting question. For instance, for me, the role of a chess psychologist seemed like a burden because I did not have the feeling there was a psychologist who had the background knowledge of chess to make it happen. I felt that they worked with some myths about chess, and it would be hard to explain everything I go through. So I didn't go down that road. It was rumored that Topalov had access to a psychologist because at a certain point, he became mentally very strong. No amount of setback would bother him. He would keep fighting. And whether the rumor is true or not, I never really found out. But, you couldn't rule out that he had actually spoken to a psychologist. But the reason I was skeptical was also back in the day when the Soviets were into psychology, they made a complete mockery of it with all sorts of tricks and so on. And I never had the feeling that, well, I'm thinking of Karpov Kochnoy. And there was a period when it kind of got ridiculous. And maybe that colored my attitude to the field. But at a certain moment, I started to have very honest conversations with Aruna about these things. I would talk about my fears very openly, and in a sense, I felt even if she's not a trained psychologist, she understands me well enough, and she's been through many of these things with me, and she knows me as well. So that should be the thing. And it could be possible that in the future, more and more psychologists will come in because in the end, they are professionals. They should know their job well, and they'll figure out something about chess. I've not heard too much of it being used so far. But I think it inevitably will come into the game as it keeps growing.
Right. No, it's kind of seeped into cricket in a big way, as we all know. In fact, the English captain, Mike Brearley, himself was a trained psychologist, and he did quite well as a captain. But I'll just move to the next question from R Sriram, who goes by the handle Mosquito Batman.
Okay.
Athletes, he says, in physical sports have continued to evolve in the past few decades, but eventually they kind of tend to plateau out as the human body can only go so far. He's talking about whether in chess, is it possible to kind of also end up hitting a upper limit in terms of how much you can go, and or do you end up kind of plateauing out as the game kind of sport evolves? I don't know if the question is clear to you, but
yes,
yeah.
It's an interesting question. Yes, the human body has certain limitations, physical limitations, and invariably you think of very futuristic stuff to think if the body can go any further, it's going to be something very futuristic. Whether we are talking of performance or even lifespans, everybody has a upper limit for where that can go. However, the nice thing about the brain is that the human brain seems not to have this kind of upper limit. If you're exposed to better and newer conclusions, your brain adapts and it learns to guess better. I mean, in a sense, chess players are also not able to handle all the information the computer is throwing at us, but we are able to pinpoint what is useful, what is relevant. We make pretty good guesses about the rest. And so, even though we're drowning in this information, we're getting better at swimming in it. So, I think chess players could continue to play better and better chess. How we will measure this, I don't know, because the rating system is relative. It's relative to everybody else who's playing and all that. Whether how we'll measure this, I don't know. But it seems that slowly the extra knowledge that the computer is bringing of the game of chess is seeping into our brains very slowly. It's still a struggle to do it, but over the years you find that at some level as I say again, your guesses get better.
Yeah, so the brain is also developing as well with all the new knowledge that you spoke about. We've got a few more questions. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. You summed it up well. That's all. Yeah.
So I'll kind of give it back to Suku because we might pick up a few more questions a little later. And I'm just hoping, Vishy, would you have a little bit more time than what we'd originally budgeted for? Then we can extend by a few minutes.
We can go on extend by a few minutes.
Okay. Thanks so much. Suku, over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much for that, Vishy. It's really gracious of you. Suku, would you want to take over?
Yes, thank you. And of course, I'm glad those questions got asked because that was some of the ground that we were going to cover in the session. To what extent do you think the teams mattered in this championship? Do you think Nepo's team and Carlsen's team were significantly different in terms of the kind of support that they offered?
I think any strategic plan carried out consistently and logically makes sense. So Nepo imagined a certain kind of match plan. He had very good team members who could help him do that match plan very well. And we see that in the first 6 games, that his strategy was being executed very well. His team had done the homework brilliantly. And so I don't think the teams make a difference. What Magnus was trying to do was consistently put himself in danger, but not very much. So what I mean is that in game 2, in game 6, Magnus felt that being the much higher rated player, his opponent would tend to be happy with draws, even if the games were getting used up. And he wanted to just keep on probing. So in game 2, game 6, even game 4 to some degree, except Jan turned out to be incredibly well prepared. Nepo was... Magnus was playing a position which is slightly worse if you know the computer evaluation. And if you don't, he knew enough about the line to minimize his risk. So his idea was the computer tends to equalize for both sides. I'm going to take a little bit of risk every day, the risk of defeat. And the team's job is to minimize that. And the team did that very well. They prepped him they took as many scenarios as they could. They ran him through the details and said, here, this move is really dangerous, but if you react like this, and for each one of these reactions of your opponent, if you react like this, you at the end, you'll be slightly worse in this kind of end game, and you have to limp out there on your own, but this is as much as we can do for you. And Magnus then took that thing and with the confidence that I will suffer, but I will not lose in a worst case scenario, and he took it to the game. I think, honestly, both teams did their job very well.
Some analysts, and one of them, of course, was Peter Nielsen, who was once your second, suggested that there were times when Carlsen seemed open to playing non-engine moves, perhaps
Mhm.
much more than Nepo. Uh, and which clearly, creates an element of surprise. Is that what you mean when you say he took some risks, he played dangerously?
Very much. But actually, if I may be pedantic, there are no non-engine
Yes,
moves.
I know.
They don't. They don't
Yeah.
exist. You can set the engine to show as
No,
many
no,
lines as you want,
obviously.
and
You're correct.
it will eventually list all
Yeah.
legal moves. What I think Nielsen means is Magnus was willing to play the eighth or ninth
Correct.
best move,
The not the
and Nepo was tending towards the top.
exactly.
No, yeah. So in fact, when quite often such moves may not even occur to me, but I will set the engine on enough lines that I'll see, oh, this is legal, oh, but it's worse. But what Carlsen and his team seem to have looked at is that there's no point me doing the three best lines because my opponent will have done the three best lines. I'm going to go and look at the really dangerous stuff, unusual stuff, try to always come up with something unusual at considerable risk to myself. And if my team then minimizes the risk for me, I'll do it. So even Magnus is doing it in a structured way. He's not just randomly going into a position because that could backfire badly. He just took positions with very little played, very unusual, and his team used the engine then to do the work necessary to make it at least not a disaster in the worst case scenario, but then that is upside works. And I think, yes, Nielsen is completely right. I mean, he would know. Magnus was willing to play lines that were not at the top, and he was willing to run that risk because he knew he needed to break the equilibrium, and it worked finally in Game 6. But Magnus's performance was also phenomenal. It shouldn't be seen that he just got lucky. His performance was really phenomenal because um, the smallest chance he got, he then has the ability to switch into the old Magnus mode and work very hard. And you can see it from outside, you can see it from inside, like I've done. And in both cases, you still think, wow, this guy is amazing. What he did in Game 6, he took something where nothing exists. He kept going round and round and round with Nepo, and he did it. In fact, you could even say with some justification that he produced the errors that Nepo made because there's no reason for Nepo to make these kinds of obvious errors. But it's only if you keep on probing your opponent and putting him under tension and pressure that the mistakes will happen. So very much he caused it as well.
To When you prepare for a match like this, um, apart from everything else that you do, how much of competitor specific preparation do you do? Right, if you know you're going to play Carlsen, is there going to be a significant difference in the way you prepare? Do you think Carlsen would have prepared differently if his opponent had been someone other than Nepo?
Oh yes, it you have to play your opponent, and Carlsen more or less hinted as much in the beginning. He said, "I am a better chess player. My worst moments, I'm much better in my worst moments than Nepo is." And Nepo, the mistakes he made, and he pointed to the Norway tournament and said, that mistake is simply not acceptable in a world championship. So Magnus was actually trying to produce the collapse that actually happened. So, and if he smelt this such a long way away, then amazing work and amazing psychological insight. But you have to tune your game to your opponent because each opponent is so different with such different strengths and weaknesses that you have to focus. Otherwise, you'll be hitting the hard side of him and you won't get anywhere.
Which is probably what happened to Nepo in the second part of the match, right? I mean,
Yes, and I think one of the things when people play Magazine, one of the mistakes they make, and I found this hard to correct as well, is that you don't want to be pessimistic. You don't want to visualize scenarios where things go wrong. So you prefer before a match, you don't go through that kind of scenario. And then what happens when you actually fall behind in the match? You're improvising at the board. I've never seen a challenger so far who has actually thought, what will it look like if I lose the first two games? Can I deal with that? What are the strategies I'll follow? It helps to go through it. It's horrible and horribly unpleasant. You don't even want to think about it before it happens. It's like having a nightmare before the real thing. But you would rather have experienced it in a nightmare than over the board, which is a terrible place to start. And I think Nepo made the same error. At least for me, I had more experience to go with, so I had enough comparable nightmares to deal with. But for Nepo, this was his first nightmare, and you didn't get a sense that there was any plan to deal with such a scenario.
Carlsen has said that this is likely going to be his last championship. Um, do you think that everyone sort of that it's impossible to keep playing at a certain level for far too long? I mean, you had a fairly long career, and at some point, what tells you that it is time to sort of retire?
Well, Carlsen is actually going back to Fischer,
Okay.
which is that Fischer, after winning that match and in the way he did, somehow couldn't find the strength to play again. And Magnus, of course, is doing it more openly. He's announcing it in advance, sort of thing. But I don't know if this is a social media thing or he's actually serious. I'm not saying he's faking it, but whether he's having a bit of fun or whether it's a serious threat. But he has complained for a while about this format and he doesn't believe in it. He says, I don't enjoy it. And I do it well because I do stuff well, but I don't enjoy it. And he's made no secret of this. It's possible he actually carries through on his threat. But then in a strange way, he named Firuzha as the opponent he wanted. And he said, well, against him, I could play a bit. So there are so many possibilities. I don't even want to get into them. He might be trying to get into Firuzha's head. He might be trying to do this. He might be trying to do that. I wouldn't know where to start. So let's just say that you would have to respect a guy who won 5 matches before deciding to stop. Yes, there's an upper limit. I think you cannot. Kasparov played matches in with Karpov alone in 84, 85, 86, 87, and then 1990. And then he got a 3-year break before it happened. He had to play again in 93. Whereas with Carlsen, he has to do it much quicker. He has to do it already in 23, I think. So he might also not be able to do this forever, and he just thinks I don't want to bother. But I've not tried to understand his answer very much because I once remember, I think Timon said it. He said, "What's the point of confirming something early or denying something early?" He says you give yourself too much room to change your mind that nobody knows what to do with it. And I think it's the same thing. I mean, the fact that this declaration is coming so early, I figure we might as well wait till June and see what he thinks. So.
Okay, I'm going to pause again before we get on to the last lap and quickly ask Charles and IG whether they want to ask a couple of more questions. Just to give you a heads up, I still can't hear IG, so I'm entirely dependent on Charles for my cues.
Don't worry. Yes, thanks, Suku. There are quite a few interesting questions, but before I just go to them, I think my colleague Anmol, who's been following the World Championships every day and we used to get messages for him, might have something to ask. Anmol, do you want to go?
Yes. So Vishy, one of the things you spoke about is how you have to have a sense of danger and maybe avoid making a blunder, right? Like a chess game is perhaps decided not by your good moves but by your worst ones.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you sort of develop that sense of danger and maintain that calm in the moment of storm? Like we have seen you do that with Samiran, because I feel that has general applicability for all of us, even now in COVID. That how do we sort of think about making that snap decision or having that sense of calm when your nerves are so high? So how do you think both Nepo and Carlsen dealt with it? I think we know the answer a little bit to that. And what is your framework around it?
So the basic thing is practice. I mean, we shouldn't forget this is the easiest and best way. If there's something you find difficult, keep at it till you get better at it. So basic advice. The second thing is actually visualization. There are things you cannot possibly study and rehearse in advance. There are always unexpected things that happen at the board. So you have to try and visualize. You have to imagine a little bit. You can base it on your own experience and say, 6 years back, I remember I had a totally one position and then I blundered and I still feel sick to the stomach. What went wrong? And then you try to think, what did I think at that moment? Was my mind drifting to what I would have for dinner? Was my mind drifting to what I would say to the press? Did I lose concentration? Was I unable to make the move I had already seen? Was I double checking? Was I nervous? You have to get inside your head and put yourself in that situation, because it's quite likely that under that pressure cooker condition, you will do the same thing again. So that kind of visualization is very important. You have to think, what are the times when I tend to fall to pieces like this, when things go wrong, and what was my mental state before it happened? And if you can do that, you can also get better by rehearsing that area. But sometimes you have to identify the area first, then rehearse it, and you get better.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer, Vishy, because I think Mahadevan had asked a similar question, similar to what Anmol had asked, about whether there is a framework that you use to make snap decisions, which I thought was a lovely way to put it. And you've, I think, provided some of the answers. I'm guessing that's. But I'll quickly move on to another question that Rahul Mathan has asked. He's, of course, one of our favorite columnists as well, and joins us occasionally for conversations. He's asking, are top chess players more intelligent than average, more gifted, or do they get where they are through the sheer dint of hard work? Can anyone get to this level without the hard work today?
There must be some element of talent, some element of uh, coming to chess naturally, because clearly there are people who work twice as hard and achieve the same results as others. So there must be some sort of baseline talent or aptitude for the game. Having said that, the rest is just work. Um, you even the most talented players, they get good at what they rehearse and work at. They get worse at what they haven't rehearsed in a while. These skills get better and they fade away with practice and work and all that. So most of it is that. But maybe there is a certain aptitude for chess which we still can't measure, but I'm sure it's there.
Right. Thanks for that. Over to you, Charles. You might want to invite Suku back for a few minutes, and then
Suku,
we'll get
would you want
crunching.
to take over?
Yes, just a
Yeah,
couple of
go ahead.
questions, and I'm glad the nature nurture question got asked, because it is a question that a lot of people have. Uh, Vishy, at this level, because from your commentary and from your comments today, um, it leads to this question in some ways. At
Mhm.
that level, when you're playing a match like this, are you really enjoying yourself? Are you having fun? Or is it at some level stressful and painful?
It is stressful and painful, but kind of all the decisions in your life had led to this point, and you find it illogical to want to run away. And also, when the result goes well, it all seems worth it, and you feel wonderful. I would say it's a bit like going for a marathon run. You're much happy to have run it than to actually have to do it in a few minutes. But at the end, it does feel worthwhile. Um, and I guess for all of us, it's a bit of this is what we've always dreamt of and played, and this is the um, highest end of it, where everything is magnified. Of course, it's unpleasant, but the whole point of your life is to be in the situation, so you don't think about it too much.
You spoke about when that nature nurture question was asked, you spoke about aptitude, and you said
Mhm.
perhaps there is a certain mental aptitude for chess. I'm going to ask you to theorize about what you think uh, the elements of that aptitude could be.
This I can't explain. It could be something geometric in your head that you perceive the way the pieces work. Because you see consistently that some people, I mean, two people will start playing chess at roughly the same age. One will just progress faster and better, and the other one is always catching up, is working much harder to catch up. And only based on, and the other thing is, when they play chess, they the stuff they produce, the new interesting stuff they produce, one will constantly come up with creative solutions. Another one is essentially using old ideas in a better and more disciplined fashion. So you sense these things, but I have no real idea of how it works. I just know that it's there. Shall I put it
Yeah,
that way?
I know it'll be interesting to see what makes a great chess player really great, right? I mean, not
Hmm.
it's. I mean, is it possible to break it down? I really don't know whether there's any research that's been done into it because research these days is pretty much done into everything. But it would really be interesting to see whether, for instance, is there something else that you're really good at?
Um, I would go back to the beginning of the nature nurture thing. There's nothing that I pursued enough to be really good at. I mean, nothing comparable to my chess because I've been at chess since the age of
Exactly.
6, and
Yeah.
very quickly it was clear that that's what I think. So I've not put in that kind of. So I have a lot of hobbies. I have inclinations. You tend to fantasize that could be good at those things, but
You
um,
don't
I think you're only good at something after you put in
lots of effort.
6 to 10 years,
Correct.
effort in it. So I don't know. I fantasize that I'll be good in lots of
Like what?
subjects. I
Like
think
what?
maths and science and these kind of subjects fascinate me. So I like reading about them. When I was young, I used to enjoy them. I still do. But until I put in the time, it's hard to say that I'll be as good at them. I could have been as good at them as I was at chess.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, I'm going to come back to the championship, and there's this undercurrent that came across in your commentary and also came across here. Carlsen, he's a character, isn't he? I mean, he's very different.
Yes, he is. He's, I think, someone who tries to challenge himself a lot. He sets very ambitious goals. So, along with the retirement of the World Championship, he said he was going to try for the 2900 rating spot. So he likes to do these things, and he surprisingly meets a couple of them. But then I think he needs to clear a lot of personal space to have the focus. So he builds a team, a bubble to be able to focus that much on chess to make that happen, and then he does it. So I think his social side is very interesting. Um, he seems very cheerful and funny, but it struck me that once Kramnik called him a
Mm.
melancholic. So that's deep down. He's someone who maybe um, carries a certain sadness with him. I do not have the training to judge that comment, but it's stuck in
Mm.
my head.
Did he get into your head when you were playing?
Yes, he did, but I think any opponent who played better than me or that I faced problems with would have done the same. In fact, I think that is true. I've at some point or the other, the difficult opponents they stay in your head for that reason. So
Excellent. Vishy, you've been very patient. Thank you for extending the session. I'm going to hand over to IG, whom I can't hear, and Charles, whom I can.
Yes,
We believe you,
but
Suku. But at this
no,
point in
everyone
time,
can hear.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, this has been a riveting conversation. I thought it'd be a great time for Dr. Ranjan Banerjee to come in because he has a very interesting another conversation coming up with Vishy at the festival on the 15th of Jan, and he's been listening very closely to this chat. Ranjan, what are your thoughts and how do you want to kind of share what you have in mind for that conversation?
So, first of all, let me just check. Am I audible? To
Yes, you are.
everybody apart from Suku, am I audible?
Yes, I can
Yes,
hear
you
you as
are.
well.
Okay. So I think three things I want to say. One is personally, it was an absolute privilege to be in on this conversation. Second is I can promise everybody who's listening that this is one of the rare cases where the movie will actually live up to the trailer and more. So if this was a fantastic trailer, then the movie will go beyond. Now, what is the difference between this conversation? This conversation was largely about lessons around the World Championship and Vishy's experience as a commentator and as a world class chess player. The conversation on the 15th is going to be about Vishy's own journey as a world champion, and we will look at two or three broad themes. One theme we will look at is how has he at various points in time reflected, learned, and reinvented. The second, which was kind of there even in this conversation, is that when do you rely on technology and when do you go beyond the technology? So how can technology be a force for good? Now, in each of these cases, what we are going to do is we are going to have a conversation in the domain of chess and try to take learnings from this domain beyond the domain of chess to leadership and management. And finally, what does an innovator's journey look like? I mean, how do you stay relevant and innovate over the course of a journey? Now, what I found interesting about today was that while today was a conversation about chess, I found we could take these lessons today also, some of these lessons. So, for instance, one of the things I found very interesting was Vishy talking about commentary, and he said, I think about my audience. And I think about an audience who is different from me, and I want to speak to that audience. And then he went on to link that to commentators should not use engines because if I don't use an engine, I'm more relatable to my audience. So I thought that was very interesting. I thought there was a very interesting perspective on decision making. How do I get better at making decisions? And one of his answers was practice. There was also a lot of psychological insight there where you're looking at where you play your opponent. And finally, there's a third theme which will come in that conversation, which is we talk about the left brain and the right brain. And today in management and leadership, there's a lot of talk about the whole brain, right? So how do you integrate the analytics that technology gives you with your intuition, and how do you put those two together? Is there something we can learn from the world of chess? Because what is interesting about the world of chess, and this is from my pre-conversation with Vishy, and Vishy, feel free to comment on this, that there was a day on which it was possible for the world champion to beat the best chess computer. I understand that is no longer a possibility even for Carlsen. Correct me if I am wrong. So
Oh,
then,
totally.
yeah,
It's not even the best computer. He couldn't beat the top 100 computers.
right.
He would lose to any one of 3 billion phones out there. Well, okay, any model from
Wow,
5 years ago.
right.
It's gotten that far. It's literally a runner and a car, which was the last car a human could race against.
Right. So the question is, I think one of the things we should explore is that there are structured domains and semi-structured and unstructured domains, right? What happens when this gets extended to more and more domains? And how do we adapt to these emerging realities, right? So I think it's a preview of a fascinating conversation. I'm looking forward to it. It was an honor to listen to this conversation. Suku, I don't know if you can hear me, but we are deeply grateful to you. So I'll just hang up at this point in time and say, Vishy, I look forward to speaking to you. I have probably earned more brownie points with my nephew than I've earned in a long, long time. So,
No, Ranjan, Suku can't hear you. He's just messaging, but he's saying that he's saying thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I
So,
mean, thank you, Ranjan. And while your school is new, I still consider myself an alumnus thanks to my BITS connection. So we should get in touch at some point in time.
yeah, I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
super.
Yeah.
This Ranjan, thank you so much. This was a lovely way to frame the conversation that's going to come up in Jan. But before we close, a few quick announcements. I'm guessing if you've enjoyed this conversation, I'd urge you to kind of join us for the next Twitter Spaces chat with Professor Raj Raghunathan on the 17th of December at the same time, 7:30. Raj is a professor of marketing. He's part of the global visiting faculty at BITSOM and a member of the governing council as well. And our chat with him is built around his best-selling book and popular Coursera course, which is titled very interestingly, "If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy?" I know that this is a theme that might be particularly important given the times we live in. So do join us for that. If you're looking for updates on the Ideas Festival, I'd urge you to follow the BITSOM and the Founding Fuel handle. We'll continue to populate the Twitter handle. And you'll also get a chance to register for the live stream if you click on the link on the tweet on your screen, on your phone screen. And you'd be able to get access to the live stream of all the sessions that we've planned. But so that's it for me. Charles, final round of thanks.
Yes, Vishy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to your conversation on Jan 15 with Dean Ranjan at the Ideas Festival. And Sukhu, once again, thanks so much for taking time out from your schedule to be with us. We know how crazy newsrooms can get, and on behalf of BITSOM and Founding Fuel, we really look forward to having you with us on December 17th, if you can make it for the conversation with Professor Raj Raghunathan. So thank you all, and good night. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.